very good evening to you. You are watching Vantage Point. I'm Stephanie Lazarus, and on this edition we'll be extensively talking about the COPE report which was presented to Parliament last week and how exactly it's going to play out in the political arena. Well, with me today is Dr. Dhananjaya Tilaka. Thank you very much for joining us.
Good evening, Steph.
And remember, we consider your perspectives valuable. So if you have any questions, you can send us those questions or views to Newsfirst.lk. And today on our discussion, let's just start off by just saying we had a lot of COPE reports come and go over the years, but we've not had a high-profile official step down because of a COPE report. So how exactly is this COPE report going to play out in history?
Well, Stephanie, that's true, but then again, we've never had any issue come up before a COPE which involved these numbers. I mean, we're talking about billions. So it's huge, or as Donald Trump would say, huge. It's much, much bigger than anything that has ever happened in Sri Lanka before. It's a kind of a financial or economic Watergate because of the ingredients. You have a guy who is not a citizen of Sri Lanka, who was controversial when he was appointed the governor of the central bank, which after all is the headquarters of the management of state finances and therefore the macroeconomy. So from that moment, this was quite a tale. It started with that. Even at that time, the president and Minister Champika Ranawalka, if I remember, within government were not happy about the appointment, but the PM pushed it through. And then you had this whole issue of the bond scam. The first COPE report, when D. Gunasekara was chairing it, and somebody who was very much a player in the January 8th election, Professor Rajiva Vijayasinghe, who was a state minister briefly before he resigned, he came on your station and explained that this was a huge scam, and he said the PM was responsible.
Well, we know that this is a huge scam, but what are the chances of this opening up an investigation into this?
Well, it depends on public opinion pressure, on pressure from the media, and also the consciousness of the parliamentarians. Now, so far the parliamentarians have been quite good. Except for a few now dubbed the footnote gang. But apart from the footnote gang, parliamentarians, irrespective of political affiliations, government and opposition, SLFP, JVP in opposition, TNA, SLMC, joint opposition, they've cooperated on this. So I don't think they're going to let go. This is too big in terms of the numbers. There's too much arrogance around it, and the people are still paying the price. The price will be paid for a long time to come, even according to what the Auditor General says. Already you have price hikes through VAT, and there's a fairly clear connection between the VAT hike and the bond scam. So this isn't like anything we've seen before, and therefore I think it's far too big to just sweep under the rug. I don't think there's a rug that's big enough, or in fact a broom that's big enough to sweep this under the rug. Well,
there are many camps that believe different things from this COPE. The UNP, some few members of the UNP believe that the Prime Minister shouldn't be held responsible because the instruction was given to go ahead with the bond, but not the instructions which they interpret wasn't actually given on the floor. But how exactly is the COPE report going to give that sort of evidence for massive investigation to take place in this regard?
Well, let's take the issue of the Prime Minister's responsibility. Now, you know that in Brazil, President Dilma Rousseff was ousted through an impeachment process, and never was it alleged that she had pocketed any money. That was never a charge. not even by her bitterest opponents. The charge was that she had turned a Nelsonian eye to what went on. But that was enough for her to be toppled. Now, I'm not saying that, well, certainly the president had nothing to do with it, but I'm not saying that this is inevitable. But it's not unfair, going by international standards, to hold the Prime Minister accountable for several reasons. One, it is he who, against the wishes of President Sirisena, brought in a person who was not a citizen or no longer a citizen of Sri Lanka and enrolled that person not as a consultant but as the head of the central bank. So the Prime Minister is responsible for that. Then, when Mr. Mahendran's term came to an end, it is public knowledge, it was in the media, that the Prime Minister made every attempt to extend his term of office as the governor of the central bank. And President Sirisena had to push back and replace him with Dr. Indrajit Kumaraswamy. Now, why wasn't Dr. Indrajit Kumaraswamy appointed by the Prime Minister in the first place? Because Dr. Kumaraswamy, firstly, has a doctorate. And, you know, he's Cambridge educated, Sussex educated. He worked in the central bank, unlike Mr. Mahendra. He was then with the Commonwealth Secretariat in London, and he came back to Sri Lanka. So here was a man with far better credentials who was shortlisted at the beginning of this whole story. But the Prime Minister chose to bring in Mr. Mahendra. Now there is a big question mark there, given especially what happened. Then, despite that scandal, and I repeat, despite the scandal, he fought hard to retain Mr. Mahendran in that seat when his term of office had come to an end. It's the President who said no and appointed Dr. Kumaraswamy instead. So that's the second time the PM got involved to try to keep him there after this scandal had broken. And after the first COPE report, the New Gunasekara COPE procedure, and the exposures by your own station, Faraz Shakatali, by Professor Rajiv Vijayasinghe, the Prime Minister's own cousin, who was one of those who defected with Minister Sirisena and caused the downfall of the Rajapaksa administration. And he came on this station and he said the PM was responsible, and that had come out in COPE. So that's the second thing. The third thing is the principle that is being adopted by this government, that the minister in charge is held responsible for anything that happens. That is why Basil Rajapaksa, Vimal Veeravansa, all these chaps, so many former ministers have had to trek to the FCID, the Bribery Commission, and so on and so forth. Now, if that principle is the one that's being upheld, well, as they say, what's sauce for the goose is sauce for the gander. So, if the minister in charge is responsible, then the minister in charge was Prime Minister Wickremesinghe. So, he can be held accountable, and I think he should be held accountable for his hands-on involvement in this, beginning with importing a non-citizen and giving him this important post. He could have had him as a consultant, that's okay, but as the head of the central bank? So I think the PM should be held accountable.
Well, the bond scam and the report that was released by COPE on the bond scam investigation has really stirred up many topics, and one of those being the VAT hike. Many say it was to compensate for the losses that was incurred because of the bond scam, but some say it is a result of government trying to cut spending, public spending, as a result of an IMF loan. What exactly is going on with regard to the VAT?
Well, you're a student of political economy, Stephanie. So, you know, the big question is this. In the second Rajapaksa term, I believe they got their politics and their diplomacy quite wrong. But they got their economics right. And my wife and I were in the audience when I was a visiting senior research fellow at the National University of Singapore's Institute of South Asian Studies, when the Deputy Prime Minister of Singapore at that time, who was also the Minister of Defence, told the audience, and he certainly didn't know there were Sri Lankans in the audience, at the annual conference, he announced proudly that well, Singapore is doing well, but in all of the region of Asia, outside of China, he said Sri Lanka has the highest growth rate. Now, this was during the second term, because I was there in 2011, I think. So, what happened to that economy? Why is it that when this government came in, suddenly they found everything wrong? They don't seem to have been able to manage it. They interrupted the relationship with China, and now they're having to pay the price, literally, for that unwise interruption. They got it all wrong. They had a healthy economy. They took over a healthy economy, an economy that was that even the Singaporeans were talking about. And now we are told that there's a crisis and we have to cut back on this and that, sell off national assets, hike VAT. I would just say that they have their strategy wrong.
There's also a very popular belief that growth was really pushed because of the debt that we were increasing, the amount of debt we obtained, and because of that we had to give it back, and we were really going on like a debt cycle. But that is what gave us, showed that we had growth in the market.
I mean, Stephanie, you look at the world's economies at different stages of economic growth. Even in terms of an individual, I mean, sometimes you borrow. It all depends on what you do with what you borrow, and whether that percentage debt, how big is it in terms of the actual economic growth? I mean, is it disproportionately large? But obviously, under the Rajapaksa administration, it wasn't disproportionately large, which is why you not only had growth, you didn't have these burdens heaped on the people. I mean, you didn't have this kind of price hike on essentials such as the health sector, on health bills, on milk food. So something has gone wrong somewhere. It can't be that when the Rajapaksas were in office, you had this, you didn't have those burdens, and you had rapid growth, and then the new lot comes, and they suddenly discover that everything is wrong and bad and so on. And this is not the first time it happened. This is why I'm very suspicious. Because when Prime Minister Wickremesinghe took over in 2001, we had the same story. You had negative growth, you had low growth, and you had the UNP government even cutting back funds to the universities, including the programs to teach English, which is when, on that occasion, the Prime Minister's cousin, Professor Rajiv Vijay Singh, actually denounced him and resigned because he found that the English language programs, which he was so committed to, were being cut back by Prime Minister Wickremesinghe. Now, Stephanie, when the same guy is Prime Minister, how come there's always some economic crisis? I mean, a little too much of a coincidence.
Well, hold that thought. We will head into a short commercial break right now, and when we come back, we'll have more answers to the questions that you have. Stay tuned. Well, welcome back. You are watching Vantage Point, and I am in conversation with Dr. Dhananjaya Tilaka. Doctor, just tell us, how exactly will the Prime Minister stepping down, or that's what everyone have been asking, all the MPs and the members and the politicians, especially from the joint opposition, have urged the Prime Minister to temporarily step down in order to carry out a credible investigation into the bond issuance. How will that help in the investigation itself?
Well, in the first place, I think that the Prime Minister should be replaced for reasons that go beyond the bond scam, but the bond scam is only the tip of the iceberg. My point is not that which the other opposition parties use. My point is that this government has run into trouble and will continue to run into trouble, and worse trouble, because of the risky policies that a few people, very few, I don't even need the fingers of one hand to count them, are pushing within government, and it's jeopardizing the government as a whole. Now, if I were looking at it from the point of view of the joint opposition, which I am not, I'd be very happy to have Mr. Wickremesinghe as Prime Minister, because there will be more such problems. But I'm looking at it as a political scientist, and I would like to see some stability also for investment, and an orderly election in 2020. And I don't see that happening so long as the policies of Prime Minister Wickremesinghe, Foreign Minister Samaravira, and former President Kumaratunga are implemented. I think that they are far too risky, far too anomalous. They are taking us away from the center, and without those three people in those positions, I mean, nobody's asking for them to be exiled, but you know, Ranil and Mangala can have some other portfolios. Then the UNP and the section of the SLFP that's with them can stabilize, and we can have a normal government of a centrist sort. But what do we have? We have right now the bond scam, the scandal. We have a budget in which there will be further cutbacks, controversy over selling off of state property. Already the newspapers are talking about Sri Lankan Airlines being, that there's a plan to sell it off, the national carrier. Now, it may be loss-making, but then you just tie up with another airline. That's what you should do. So, you have a very controversial budget coming up. And then we are told by Professor Suri Ratnapala, an expert who is participating in the drafting of the new constitution, by the way, again, not a resident of Sri Lanka. We are told by him that in a newspaper interview that the draft constitution will be presented by the end of this year. And he says in the Daily Mirror interview that this will involve the elimination of the executive presidency. Now, I ask myself, if there weren't an executive president, an executive power were in the hands of the Prime Minister, wouldn't Mr. Arjuna Mahendran still be the governor of the central bank? And wouldn't perpetual treasuries still be in business? Obviously, it would. The only reason that Mr. Mahendran is no longer the governor is because we have an executive presidency. So, we are proposing, or the government is proposing, or Mr. Wickremesinghe is proposing a constitution in which there won't be an executive presidency, in which he will have the executive powers. So that's going to be very controversial. I don't think the SLFP is going to be very happy to be deprived of a power center. So we've got that. Then we've got ECTA, or ETCA. We discussed that the last time. And then we have the visit of the Indian Foreign Secretary with a team of businessmen, and according to the Indian press, one of the proposals is that Palali airport in the north be given to India to develop as an international airport with a view to twinning it with Chennai in Tamil Nadu. Now, all of this is very controversial, and the cherry on the cake will be Mr. Mangala Samaravira's promise to set up special courts, bring in special laws, set up a special office of outside the AG's department, and try the Sri Lankan military on allegations of war crimes. Now, all of these are frankly fairly crazy things to do.
But shouldn't the government obtain a two-third majority of consensus from Parliament before pursuing such goals of tying up with another country?
Well, actually, Stephanie, on all these matters, including ETCA, the issue of accountability, the constitutional proposals, I think that there should be an attempt at an all-parties consensus. Now, this is perfectly possible. Look at the 19th Amendment. Everybody from Vimal Veeravansa to Ranil Wickremesinghe voted for it, thanks to the fact that the President steered the discussion. So I don't see why, for the sake of stability, we don't strive for national consensus as represented by an all-parties consensus in Parliament. But these proposals of Prime Minister Wickremesinghe are so off the charts, I mean, they're so off the wall, that you can't have a consensus. Look what has happened with the bond issue. What has happened is that the coalition that supported the January 8th outcome, the result, has fissured. You have the JVP, the SLFP, the TNA, the Sri Lanka Muslim Congress, all voting for what we shall call the majority report in court, or the majority position, supported by the joint opposition. And on the other hand, you have what COPE chairperson Handunetti has called the footnote gang. So you have the footnote gang. Now that's a clear split, even if you count out the joint opposition, in the January 8th coalition. Now that's entirely because the Prime Minister brought in Mr. Mahindran from Singapore and allowed him to do this. And look at the political consequences. It's a fissure. I mean, as a critic of the government, I should be delighted, but I'm not. This just shows a certain arrogant attitude on the part of the Prime Minister, and I don't think it does us any good.
Well, with that, let's head into the second commercial break. We will be right back. See you. Welcome back. You are watching Vantage Point, and I'm in conversation with Dr. Dayanjaya Tilaka. Well, there is also speculation that Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe will be in the centre stage in the future, because there is also talks of a no-confidence motion against him in Parliament. How successful do you think they will be in achieving that target?
Well, Stephanie, even if they fail, they'll be successful. I mean, that sounds funny, but let me tell you what I mean. I don't blame the joint opposition for going for this target, because in other parts of the world, this is what happens. Iceland, you've been covering that on your station. But Brazil is the big one. So there was an impeachment motion against Dilma Rousseff. The equivalent would be a no-confidence motion here. And I remember the famous Bofors scandal in India, where Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi was accused of being somehow implicated in a scandal concerning the purchase of guns, Bofors long-range artillery from Sweden, which involved some kickbacks. It's not that he got the kickbacks, but they said he was involved, and there was a huge scandal, and that affected him badly politically. He had to go for elections. So the no-confidence motion is a legitimate idea. Now, what happens if they move that no-confidence motion? Either they secure a majority, in which case Mr. Wickremesinghe has to leave, or the parties that stood together during the bond scam would have to vote for Mr. Wickremesinghe because they don't want to rock the boat. But then they lose the credibility they had built up by taking this very principled stand on the bond issue. For instance, the JVP, the SLFP, TNA and SLMC. So what are they going to say? Well, we are opposed on this, but at the no-confidence motion, we are going to vote for the PM. They don't look good. So that's the second option. The third option is abstention or absenteeism, which I think is what will happen. And what would that do? The PM will survive, but it will be very obvious that he doesn't command anything like a two-thirds majority in Parliament, and it happened over the VAT. He got 112 or something, which was not two-thirds. So then it dropped, I think, 76 to something on the part of the opposition. So it dropped to 76. Now, if he does poorly at the no confidence vote, then he'll have to think about 10 times before he moves on the constitution, because if you can't, if you don't have a 2/3 majority to support you, how on earth are you going to present a draft constitution and secure a 2/3 majority in the House? It's very dicey. So there's a domino effect. So whichever way it goes, the Prime Minister is going to be the loser, even if he barely wins the vote. Now there's an outlier outcome. The President may decide that one way of preventing such an embarrassment is to replace the Prime Minister. Because if he replaces the Prime Minister, then who are they going to move the no confidence motion against? There's no target. So again, the PM will be the loser, and the President has the prerogative of picking somebody from either the UNP or the SLFP, which supports him, or even from outside. For instance, if it's somebody like Dinesh Gunawardena, somebody against whom there's really no criticism, I haven't heard any slurs on his character. Who knows, the entirety of the SLFP and some of the UNP might even support him. So the no confidence motion is going to set in train consequences which are going to be serious for the Prime Minister, even if he if he wins by a simple majority.
Well, with that, we wrap up this edition of Vantage Point. Thank you very much for joining us, and it was a wonderful conversation. Well, we hope you enjoyed it too, and you can also send us your questions to newsfirst@maharaja.lk, because we strongly believe that your perspective matters. Well, I'm Stephanie Lazarus. We'll meet you again next fortnight. Good night.